Hi, everyone. It's already 55 of you, 60 of you. So thank you so much for making the time on Monday, 5 p.m. French time, 8 a.m. Pacific time. And Ted, what's the name of your time?
It is 11 p.m. in Taiwan.
11 p.m. Ted, you're the winner. Thank you for doing this for us. So today's webinar is really, really special to me, thanks to our panel, Dion and Ted. Ted and I used to work together at Instabase, which is now a Series C unicorn. Thanks, Ted. VCs you may have heard of is A16Z, Greylock, NEA, Axel, where Ted was our CTO in charge of building and delivering one of the craziest and intense product roadmap I've ever seen. During that time, we did everything we could to hire Dion. And I'm talking about something like 5 years ago. World champion of hacking and already one of the most knowledgeable NLP experts. At that time, Dion respectfully declined our offer and started Forethought, Series B, and one of the current darling of Silicon Valley, winner of the TechCrunch Disrupt 2018. For those that are familiar, it's the most challenging startup event you will ever be part of. So Dion, congrats again. When Ted reached out to me, as he just published a beautiful book called Automated Paperwork, and by the way, feel free to reach out to me after the session, I'll send you the link. I immediately thought of putting together those two big brains to discuss the state of the art of NLP and NLU. You guys, the 80 people that are currently listening to this webinar, I'm pretty sure you have a good sense about how these two technology, or I'm not sure if technology is the right word, but is or are disrupting your business today and will disrupt the way you work and the way you work with your ecosystem tomorrow. So that's really the goal of our conversation today, is to walk you through this journey from Dion's perspective with Forethought that is already disrupting your business and see how every single line of business can benefit from automation, with Ted that's going to walk us through his vision, whether it's NLP or NLU, to really tell us how we move from robots to what you said, Ted, Iron Man, if I'm correct?
To Iron Man, that's right.
Iron Man. So let's start. Dion, do you mind giving us a sense of what Forethought about? And let's get straight into why you love for NLP.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julian, for the kind introduction, and good to see you. Good to see you, Ted. Yeah, so I started Forethought a few years ago on a mission to use artificial intelligence to bring out genius in every single business and its customers. Forethought, what we do is we build artificially intelligent agents to help businesses be more productive, more efficient, starting very specifically in customer support. So our first AI, which we call Agatha as a nod to Minority Report, is the AI for customer support. And we will integrate with help desk systems. So think Zendesk, think Salesforce, things like that. Automatically resolve questions. So similar to a chatbot, but much more intelligent. Route, triage questions, and then assist agents with the more complex problems, giving them search tools and suggested answers. So that's what we do. Since we launched at TechCrunch Disrupt, we've grown to working with some of the largest unicorns on the planet. So if you've ordered groceries from Instacart recently, or if you've taken a class online on Masterclass or anything like that, likelihood is you're probably using us or interacting with us in some way for your customer support. I started this idea in NLP. Really, it goes back to high school for me. So I've always been a math and computers guy. I've built products and infrastructure at companies like Facebook and Palantir. But in school, despite being a math and computers guy, I was really bad at subjects like history. And Julian, I think you know this story, but so at the time, I built an AI that would read my notes and answer my questions and quiz me on the material and really help me study for history class. And that was my first foray into natural language understanding. And since then, I've been obsessed with this idea of how AI can really help anyone, whether it's at work or at school, become more efficient, become a genius at what they do. And so that was the train of thought that led me down this rabbit hole. And I don't think I've looked back ever since.
Wow, thanks, Dion. We'll go back into so your love for NLP and automation, And Ted, can you tell us, why are you in Taiwan right now? What's going on?
Well, I'm in Taiwan right now, so our family can have a little bit more normal life. My wife is Taiwanese, so we come here all the time anyway. It's more like a second home. And I have a 6-year-old son, and so coming here allowed him to continue school normally. Taiwan, through a lot of diligence, was able to largely keep COVID out for mostly the entire stretch. So we've been very fortunate, and I'm very grateful to be allowed to come, and it's been a wonderful time.
And you took time to write your book. Well, where does this come from?
So I'm a teacher at heart, I think, and I don't know in France, in some other places, what the emotion around enterprise software is, but I certainly thought before I got involved in enterprise software that it was this bleak, soulless, heartless place where everybody has these large specs. And I found that it's this amazing, wonderful place with a lot of heart, a lot of amazing people working inside it. They're just all hidden away on the 4th floor or the 10th floor or the 100th floor of a building. So when I was at Instabase, I had the opportunity to meet and interact with many of the world's largest banks, chatting with them about how they're crafting their document automation strategy, seeing what kinds of problems they have, and what's at the forefront of how companies are thinking about AI today. At the fringe levels and the biggest global scale. And when I left and came here to spend some time in Taiwan, it might sound goofy, but I just remain very excited about helping people understand this world. It's a really lucky time that we're in the AI industry and in the NLU, the natural language understanding industry, because you often don't get to know that you're right at that elbow joint of an exponential curve when you're in it. Sometimes you have to look back and realize you were there. But there's a pretty strong sense in the community that we are exactly at that elbow joint right now, and that in the next 10 years, everything's going to change in terms of the way we're able to process documents. So companies like Forethought are an example, companies like Instabase are an example. So helping people understand exactly what that means, how they should think about this, and then how they can use that for their business, I think it's a tremendously fun thing to talk about. And that's what, in automating paperwork, it's what I try to walk people through for natural language extraction specifically.
Dion, I see you knowing, saying, yeah. Can you tell us how this acceleration resonates in your mind?
I love that, Ted. And that's exactly how I think about NLU in particular. The way I like to think about it, or the analogy, is computer vision. So one of the first big areas of computing to be knocked down by deep learning, for example, was computer vision. So the ability to give robots vision, the ability to see, locate objects, things like that. I mean, it started, in the past decade with, I think it was the MNIST or ImageNet data sets, starting to really kick that off, neural networks being applied to that. And then you all of a sudden see this exponential curve. So giant companies, think, Scale AI, think any self-driving car company being tackled with just this one simple primitive of computer vision, right? And that's going to be billions, 100 billion, $1 trillion industry. And the cool thing is NLP, in particular NLU, natural language understanding, is on a very, very, very similar curve of maybe 10 years back, right? And so we're starting to see with, applications in enterprise applications and consumer, whether it's with document processing or anything like that, the majority of the world's information, especially in the largest businesses, is in text or is in language, right? And so we're going to see this exponential curve. Hopefully, we'll be a part of that. But I think more broadly, NLU is on the same curve that computer vision was, but maybe a decade between.
Dion, can you do me a favor? I'd love to have you to be specific, because you're really, with all your clients, you're hands-on, so you can share some specific usage and in the future how it can be used. Well, Ted, please share with us the concept. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with NLP, but NLU, Ted, do you mind sharing a little bit about where it comes from, what should be expected? And then Dion, feel free to share as many examples that comes to your mind.
Sure. Well, so NLU is largely, it's like the eyes and the ears of the computer. So when you speak to your smart speaker, NLU, natural language understanding, is what allows it to understand you. And then natural language generation is what allows it to speak back. And then NLP is kind of the toolkit inside the brain underneath. It's the nuts and bolts and the plumbing. But I think more specifically to Dion's point about what was happening in image processing that now is happening in natural language processing, people hear a lot about deep learning and deep this and deep that. It's not just buzzwords is the main takeaway that I think people should know. There actually is an incredibly different thing that's happening now than what happened before. And it's two things. One of them is the modeling approaches we have today are capable of learning the representation of a problem in addition to the solution to a problem. So we all maybe took statistics at some point in high school or college, and we remember having to plot a line through a group of points. And so the human being was the one that came up with the idea that we wanted to plot the line. The computer didn't come up with that. It just figured out what the line was. What's happening with deep learning is it's essentially choosing the representation of the problem as well as the solution at the same time. That sounds a little bit abstract, but it's one meaningful step closer to us being able to a degree of approximation, throw data at the computer and truly have it take a deeper role in just understanding what to do with it than was happening in the past. And this is one of the critical elements. Another is composability of the models that we use. In order to allow the new approaches to solve an entirely different category of problems. So you would probably be surprised to find out that a lot of your smart speaker is actually just powered by rules. If this, then that. If they say this, then they say that. So on the one hand, it's incredible that we can talk to our speakers. But on the other hand, those speakers were built with yesterday's technology. And only just now in the past year have they really begun rolling forward onto the stack that the modern companies are using to let us read our documents, let us automate our customer support, and so on. Julian, I think you might be muted.
Sorry, Dion. Dion, any specific examples, what you've seen over the years, in that trajectory that Ted is sharing with us?
Yeah, and actually that most recent example in our smart speakers is a really great one. And I actually use that example a lot when trying to pitch forethought and explain why the AI is different. But when you talk to most NLP systems today, they are rules based. So you might have a team of hundreds or thousands of language engineers coding rules into your Alexa or something like that, saying, hey, when I see the word order, when I see the word pizza, then extract a little bit out, but I'm going to go and order a pizza, right? Whereas NLU gets really interesting, or the modern techniques get really interesting, because the AI is starting to learn language, learn representations from scratch, right? And so some of the more cool things, I'll start with maybe some of the stuff we're working on, and then where we can go with all this. But first things first, so question answering was kind of the first model and first problem set that we tackled here at Forethought. And so that's given a question, so like a support ticket, or it can be a simple query or search, go and figure out what is the answer to this question. So have an AI that can maybe natural language generate an answer. So think of dialogue systems, or can search through a corpus of information like past tickets or knowledge-based articles, and then generate an answer from that, right? And so that's the first problem that we're solving using natural language understanding. And again, compared to old systems where you'd have to hard code canned responses or things like that for the AI to respond with a modern NLU based system, you don't have to hard code anything. You just throw data at it, and the AI is picking up nuance and language. And when the customer uses an exclamation mark, they're probably angry, and things like that end up either escalating or things like that, and is able to pull out answers. So that was one of the really interesting problems. Machine reading comprehension in general. Other things that we're doing are classification of tickets. So for example, if a customer says, hey, I've had an issue, there's maybe a trust and safety issue. Imagine, one of your, like a Thumbtack or an Uber or something like that, where you have a marketplace of people and they're interacting, and sometimes there can be, actual safety issues. And so if a customer sends in a support ticket and has a flavor that this probably needs to be escalated quickly, our AI can pick up on that. So things like, danger, or maybe some money is involved or safety is involved, and the AI can actually figure that out without you hard coding what that means, just from learning the nuance, just from learning the language, and then quickly get that to a very experienced agent, right? And so things like that. So whether it's, question answering, escalation, triage, these are all things that AI can tackle now without being explicitly hard coded.
Ted, any other industry? So you mentioned that hockey stick, that's accelerator. Which industry do you see will benefit the most from that acceleration?
So I realize this may sound like a silly answer to say everything, but I want to make the argument for it. And if it's something backed off, then at least I will have tried. So think about the following. We live in a distributed world. We're here talking over Zoom from 3 different continents. One of the ways that we deal with people working together is to write things down. We've been doing this for thousands of years. We write things down so that we can still have them tomorrow. We write things down so that I can hand it off to you or to Dion and he can pick up where I left off. So some people think about paperwork and they think, oh, paperwork is going away. Well, no, paperwork isn't about pieces of paper. Paperwork is about the human act of sharing information with each other. It could be digital, it could be on paper. And paperwork is how we coordinate as human beings. So one way to look at all business processes is through the paperwork that begins it, the human act of communication that begins it, and the paperwork that is at the end. And so one way to look at a loan is a human being goes to a bank and says, I'd like to borrow money, and they look at who I am, and then they agree to borrow money. Another way to look at a loan is a process by which a piece of paperwork that describes a loan application turns into a piece of paperwork that describes a loan approval. It's maybe a weird way to describe a loan, but every single element of our business can be thought about this way. Customer support, interviewing somebody, applying for jobs, searching for jobs, opening up an account, doing an account transaction, doing diligence on a new client, auditing. All of these things can be thought of as the act of taking a set of communication for humans and producing a set of communication, maybe with decisions in it for humans. And so honestly, I think the answer is everything is about to change in a big way in terms of how we approach it. The question is going to be what's automated, what is going to stay the same feel to a human, but maybe be just a little bit better. It'll feel a little bit easier to use, a little bit less friction. And then in what places are we going to have combinations of humans and computers working together?
So let me piggyback on what you just said. So how about our audience right now who's been listening to you guys? What's the best way to be prepared? What's the best way to understand how it will impact, whether there's, founders of a startup, whether they're head of line of business? How should they think about that move, that those changes? Dion, you want to give it a first try?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really funny, and this is also the same advice I would give to founders looking for a startup idea. But as you're living life, as you're in business, as you're in enterprise or in a startup, there are so many things that are inefficient. Like I remember when I was a kid thinking about how things got delivered, like I just assumed it was automated. But every single step of the way for a package getting delivered to your home there's a human there. There's somebody literally putting it in a box. There's somebody putting it on a truck. The truck is driven, and then there's somebody literally dropping it off at your home. And I couldn't fathom that. And I think the same is true for almost every business process today. So if you think about finance, for example, the way that you do your as a startup, we're thinking about our customer acquisition cost and our SaaS metrics and things like that. All of that is pretty manual today. Like all of that is by looking through documents and things like that. As you think about how you do HR and payroll and everything in a business, you start to see all of these sub-problems. And so probably the most interesting way to understand how NLP or NLU or any new technology can be applied to you is think about the problems in your day. So as you're going through, if you're in marketing, as you're walking through your day, literally think about where you spend the most time and the most pain. And there's often a hidden problem under there where, just as Ted mentioned, you can probably reduce it to one of these primitives and probably build a really big business off of it in the future. So that's my maybe abstract advice, but it can get pretty powerful.
Thanks, Dion. How about you, Ted?
Well, yeah, and I actually jump into this in a very specific way in the book, Automating Paperwork, available at fine websites everywhere, www.automatingpaperwork.com. It's available for free on the web. You're all welcome to take a browse, and there's a Kindle version as well. But because I know this is the problem that everybody should be asking about is, okay, well, where do I start? It's not the only answer, but I think a very useful answer is information extraction, among which there are many other, I want to make sure I'm like very, very upfront saying there are many other wonderful places to start. But I'll tell you why information extraction I think is a good one. At many places of inefficiency, people are picking up information from one pile of paper and essentially dropping it back down onto another pile of paper in a spreadsheet, into a process. The robotic process automation industry is very much one form of this for automating computers. And then the document extraction industry is very much part of this for paperwork. The other reason I think it's a fantastic place to start is because it's very well established for the last 10 odd years, as well as very well established in terms of some of the new approaches, to the point where you can almost create a playbook to coach people who maybe don't have an engineering team to identify good problems inside their business, to vet those problems so that they have a really good understanding of whether or not it's going to be a good candidate for extraction, all before you get engineering involved. And you can actually do a tremendous amount of work if you understand just a little bit of the key principles, how to look for a good problem, how to vet these problems, which are all in the book with worksheets and so on to help you go through this, so that when you do approach maybe your own engineering team, maybe a vendor who's going to help you, you have a really nice briefing for them that shows them, here's exactly the data that we have, here's why we think we can turn this into a good extraction project. And so it's a very well understood at this point segment of the NLU industry that can really be applied everywhere, whether it's shipping labels or emails coming in from customers asking for certain account actions or account onboarding or audit and diligence of clients.
Dion, any thoughts about what Ted just shared with us?
No, I think that that's a really powerful kind of, I like to think about things in fundamental primitives. So information extraction, you're going to see a lot of that just in pretty much every business area. So, yeah.
So before we go to the Q&A session, and thanks, Laurent, for your first question. And please, to all of you, feel free to ask any question on the chat box. We'll take them in the next couple of minutes, but we'd love to use the next 5 minutes to talk about what's next. Ted, you came up with words that I've never heard before, such as multilingual models, multimodal models, multi-use models, so fine-tunable models. So what are we talking about here? What are we going to see in the next 2 to 3 years?
Sure, maybe I feel like I can probably tee up Dion because he's working with this in the real world, and I can probably just give you the high level entry point to it. So in the past, if I wanted to make a model for France and a model for Taiwan and a model for America, I would have to have 3 separate teams building 3 separate rule sets. And then every time something changed, I would have to update one of those rule sets. So AI was very much humans. Underneath the box, if you open up the hood, you would see a whole bunch of humans very busily working away and making all of these fine-tuned adjustments. Modern day AI, I think of it as multi. It's multi-use, multilingual, multimodal. You can pipe in images of documents as well as the text to the same model in every single language. And it will learn how to cope with that because of the enormous parameterization. Parameterization just means there's a lot of knobs and switches inside the model. The enormous parameterization of the model. And so this allows allows all of us for the first time to have one unified technology stack that we apply globally across all of our countries for language, that we apply departmentally across all of the different small tasks that we're using. Maybe one department needs to extract information, another department needs to classify documents. More and more, we're seeing that these models are all converging towards a unified approach. And that's, anybody who has looked at the history of any industry, think of Henry Ford and reusable parts in the Model T or industrialization in general, knows that the big point where everything changes is the point at which you figure out how to make the reusable part that you can just stick everywhere. And we're very rapidly approaching that. So I think that's one thing that's changed. I want to just squeeze in one more thing in addition to the multi thought, which is pre-training. So anybody who's worked with AI in the past and maybe hired a vendor, maybe done it themselves, may have run into a frustration where people keep asking them for data. Data is actually really a pain to generate. Nobody wants to label data. Regulations forbid you from generating data. It turns out getting a lot of data is very hard unless you're Google or Amazon or Microsoft. But the new models are allowing us to pre-train the model on, say, the internet or Wikipedia or all the books ever written, and then simply fine tune on your specific data set. And this sounds like a small thing. I think we're going to look back and realize it's an enormous thing, because what it allows us to do is actually, Julian, there's this, do you remember Trader Joe's from the United States when you were there? They sell these wonderful French baguettes that I'm sure by French standards are not good. I love them, and they would sell them 80% finished. So you could go to Trader Joe's and you could buy a baguette that was almost baked all the way, but not quite. Take it home, bake it for 5 minutes, you're done. That's what these new models allow us to do, is they allow large companies with great access to processors and information to bake the model 95% of the way. You put it in the shopping cart, take it home, and now you only have to train on 1 or 2 documents, maybe 10, maybe 20. But the point is, it's not hundreds and it's not thousands. And that's a big, big difference.
Ted, you know how to talk to your audience. Congratulations. Dion, Dion, can you tell us a little bit how this is impacted your business, Forethought, and how, like, all those entrepreneurs that are currently listening to us, and now they're suddenly thinking, oh my God, I can take those blocks of technology and build on top to deliver something amazing. Can you tell us how you see it and how it does impact your business?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because Ted is basically describing our approach. And so, yeah, the first thing, I think that idea that, well, one, multilingual, multi-language models. We actually just launched Agatha in 100+ languages. And again, we didn't have to hard code, English, French differently, but we're using models now that are actually trained on all these languages simultaneously. And that actually gets you kind of a bidirectional improvement. Because one, you don't need as much data. You can go and find data from English, French, all the languages you can find, and that becomes your giant data set to train the model. And two, the output of that model is actually much better because learning representations, for example, in Spanish actually helps you understand how to answer or ask questions in English, right? And so it's actually able to train and learn a little bit more. And then that second part on pre-training, I think is huge. So we do that here at Forethought. So we have models that are trained on, like Ted said, the entire corpus of the internet, really. So like things like Wikipedia, Wall Street Journal, all of the the books in the past. And then so that's enabling the AI to learn language structure. So learning that when somebody asks, how can I do X, Y, and Z, they're looking for instructions generally, and the kind of response is going to be a step-by-step guide or something like that. And then it learns, hundreds or thousands of these kind of, whether you want to call them rules or millions of these parameters, that's what's being learned. And then when we actually take our model to a new customer, we fine tune on their data. So if you go to a new business and we're trying to learn about their support ticket, well, we're learning about, once we fine tune on their data, we know, the name of the business. That might be a trademark or something that in giant English language corpus doesn't actually exist. We're learning that, for a app company, the word notification means your notifications, rather than for a delivery company, notification might mean something else, right? And so that's what's happening as you fine tune on the data. And that allows you to get really, really, really powerful on a smaller subset of data. And then I think your second question was, how can somebody else use this? Yeah, exactly. I think at the end of the day, AI is probably following a similar variant of Moore's Law, but probably even faster, depending on how you model it out, right? Because, 10 years ago, building a machine learning model would be crazy. Now you can just, download TensorFlow. If you want to use a natural language understanding, go and find Google's BERT or a simple version of it. And then you have this really powerful model that can truly understand human recognition or human language to start, right? And so I encourage everyone, eventually programming machine learning models is going to be like writing Python code, right? And that's just going to be it. Instead of writing programs, you're going to be writing models that learn how to program themselves, right? And so it's really just a shift in the paradigm. And now we're kind of on this weird, that inflection point. But I think if you fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, NLP, machine learning models will be the way people build systems. So I think it's going to be fun.
Wow. So to summarize, is this correct? We're moving from writing code to writing models. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. So instead of writing programs, you're writing machines that learn how to write programs.
Wow. Excellent. Ted, please.
Well, you might even be willing to take it one step farther. Dion, I'm curious if you think I'm out in la la land on this one. But some of the newest ways to interact with models, people might have seen OpenAI's GPT-3, which is a giant language model. A language model is essentially a knock-knock joke machine. If I say knock-knock, I don't know if in France there's knock-knock jokes. If I say knock-knock, everybody knows how to say who's there. It predicts what comes next. And it turns out that if you read the entire internet, just predicting what's next gives you an incredible capability to predict all sorts of useful things. People have found a way to harness this capability by doing what's called prompt engineering. And I have to say, it looks pretty eerie. You essentially are coaxing the machine with human language into doing what you want, is one way to think about it. And so when Dion says we're moving from writing software to programming models, it might be that the nature of programming of the models could be in our own natural language. And that's a pretty wild thought. I'm sure that there was a certain point in the 1960s, 1970s, where we moved from circuit design to punch cards to assembly language to higher level programming languages. And each one of those was a small step past the one before it. But when you stand and look at circuits and then higher level programming languages, there's a chasm between. And we may be seeing the same thing happening, but we can only see it the few steps right in front of us. So it's hard to see where it's going to go, but increasingly, programming may not just be programming models, but using our own voice, using our own speech in order to coax them to do what we want. Not because it's necessarily better, but that's because how the knowledge is represented, that the internal representation of knowledge in these models is human language. And so that's how we might end up having to interact with it.
Wow. Thanks, Ted. So let me take a couple of questions. And Laurent, thanks for your patience. Back to your point, Dion, which countries and which industry do you believe are prime for that adoption, for that move that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I am building a AI for customer support company, so possibly biased. But in terms of countries, I think every single one. So first and foremost, so similar to Ted's answer earlier, in terms of industries, I do think that in the enterprise, there's something special about NLP and NLU. Again, 80% of work that is done is some document or even video or text, but will involve human language of some kind. And then second, in order to build a great business, I have a thesis that it can't just be a research lab, right? And so there are great, businesses, companies that are solely focused around the research. So Ted mentioned OpenAI, you have DeepMind and things like that. And those are gonna generate amazing advancements in humanity. I think if you're also going to build a scalable business, one of the things you should do is think about the business problem that you're tackling. And the enterprise has a plethora of them, right? And so whether it is in, customer support, even within customer support, there's probably dozens, whether it's in a business function like finance or otherwise. And so I do think looking at internally at an enterprise, and if you're already working at a large company and thinking about starting your next thing, thinking about where that is, again, maybe it's automating paperwork, as Ted might say, there's going to be a ton of really big businesses that are coming out. And we're really just at the beginning. Like if you look, 5-10 years ago, or if you Google, top 10 AI companies in the public markets, they're like, the companies that are mentioned are Amazon, Google, Facebook, et cetera. And these aren't AI companies per se, but they are the biggest companies that are leveraging AI. And I think the next generation of companies are all going to be, or there's going to be quite a few that are, you know, decacorns, hectacorns that are pure AI in some sense as real AI takes off.
And another way to think about it too is it's both looking across different businesses and business functions, but there's also different ways to provide value. And so many people think about automation as, for example, an efficiency improvement. Before it took me $10, now it takes me $1. Before it took me 10 minutes, now it takes me 1. But that's only one narrow way to think about the kinds of business transformation that can be done with AI. So just to toss out a few others to help you think in different directions about this. You can take a scarce resource and instead of making it cheaper, you can apply it more universally. So audit is like this. A lot of times companies will spot check 1% or 10% of all of the things they might audit because they don't have time, it's too expensive. And so one way to think about it isn't let's do a cheaper job auditing the same number, but rather let's try to audit everybody every second or everybody every day in terms of a business. Another way to think about it is it helps you take what before was white glove, high-end service that came at extremely high personnel cost and spread that so that it's available to everybody. So here's an interesting fact. I'm going to mess the numbers up because I don't recall them exactly. But if you talk to an investment bank and you ask them how their retail service agents spend their time, they'll tell you that most of their time goes to the top clients. And then the rest of the time is done doing paperwork and typing things into the computer. So one question to ask is, what if you could provide that same level of relationship management to all of your clients, to your clients with the least money, to your clients who are first-time investors that you provided to your top clients? So then you're not automating in order to save time, you're automating to fundamentally change the kind of relationship you have with most of your clients so that everybody has access. And then a third and final way to think about it, you might call the AWSification of everything. So everybody looks at Amazon and marvels from other industries, dripping with awe at how they were able to essentially virtualize and white label the entire hosting and IT market. Everybody's on AWS in some form or another. Well, every industry has their version of AWS. And so another thing we can start asking is, with greater automation, can we begin to create the AWS for other industries, number one, but also things that touch the real world, that aren't strictly digital, but also reach out and interact with humans? And that's another way to think about this. So in addition to, like many things, there's many dimensions to it. So there's the nature of the AI and the NLP that you're using. There's the industry that you pick, but then there's also the type of value that you're trying to create for the business is another way to help generate ideas.
Brilliant, brilliant. I've got a last question for you guys, and it's another one from Laurent, and I like this one. Whether you're a startup or you're a corporation, what kind of skills will you be looking at when you're going to hire those talented engineers that's going to help with those models? Dion, you want to start? Who are you hiring? Who are you hiring right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing about machine learning is there's kind of two sides to it. So there's the research side, and you have to hire people who are, insanely good at the theory, at the research, and so on, and kind of at the cutting edge. And then there's also the implementation side. And like Ted mentioned earlier, a lot of machine learning and NLP work boils down to data wrangling and infrastructure and things like that. And so you do need the kind of, whether it's in an individual human or within the team, you do need the breadth of research, as well as what some folks might call full stack deep learning, right? So folks who are able to actually implement a model, get in, write TensorFlow, know how to launch it on AWS, know how to launch these things. So I think there is actually a ecosystem around building a good NLP team that is not to be understated. And so I think that's something to keep in mind.
Ted, do you want to?
100% agree. It's very hard. And I think as an industry, this is something that we're still trying to figure out what the exact composition of a good NLP team looks like. One other thing to throw on, I'm in completely full agreement, is that there's programming. I'm responding in part to Lauren's comment. He said, beyond the skills you would find in a SaaS, beyond people who have good process. One habit that if you are a programmer, if you have programmers in your family, you might know is that we as programmers tend to take a did it work, oh good, let's move on approach to things here and there. And we write tests to try to capture this, but in large part, programming is about checking if the thing worked and moving on. It is culturally sort of how programming works. Machine learning has it wants to interact with humans and with process very differently. And so I think having project managers, engineering managers, product managers who have experience or who have thinking in terms of that side of the relationship to a computer is very important. Because in my experience, if you take the traditional software development mindset towards interacting with models, it can work, but there will be a lot of bumps in the road. And so it's very important that you come to it with the right level of process and understanding that you're working with a fundamentally different kind of interaction relationship to the computer and to the information.
Excellent. I see it's almost time's up. We've got a couple of more questions. One related to hardware, remarkable. I don't know if it's a question that you guys have a perspective on.
Is remarkable the paper tablet?
Yeah, it is. It is. Absolutely.
More of a GAFA data input. So I do know, so handwriting, this might not be the answer to the question they're asking, so forgive me if not. So handwriting recognition is very challenging. In the world, so OCR, optical character recognition, is translating a picture of text into the text that we have in a word processor that a computer can manipulate. It's exciting times for OCR because I think the big tech companies have pretty much figured it out with very, very good accuracy for printed documents and even very good accuracy for messy photocopied scanned documents. Handwriting is sort of the last stand of OCR. I don't think there's yet a model, to my knowledge, which is able to do it to the point where we can assume that the results are going to be good. I could be wrong. I do know that tools like Remarkable, and one of the reasons it works well on your tablet, which might be dangerous to infer knowledge from, is because they have access to the pen stroke. And so the models that they use to recognize handwriting on a pen tablet, they're actually looking at where you placed your pen on the tablet and when you picked it up. And that has an extraordinary wealth of information that can translate into better recognition than if you were to just take a photograph of a handwritten page. And so this is really just riffing off of the concept of digital paper, but within the handwriting OCR, there's two meaningfully very different categories. One is on tablet OCR, and then one is photographs of pages, and they have very, very different performance right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Ted, for playing with the question. Last question for you, Dion. We're talking about the search, Amazon Kendra, and the question from, if you don't mind looking at the question from Warith, and tell us what are your thoughts about relying exclusively on Amazon Kendra.
Yeah, so the question is, if you don't want to invest in AI internally in your business, is it okay to just rely exclusively on Amazon Kendra and then too bad for the remaining 5%? Fundamentally, so I think there is a Pareto principle involved, right? Like you can get a certain leg of the way with just basic technology, and then the rest is kind of too bad. I don't think it's 95, I don't think it's 95.5 though, because quite frankly, when it comes to enterprise search, it's probably more, probably 60-40, right? And so what I mean by that is you need to know when it comes to your documents, the nuance, the context that probably comes from your business. And probably comes from your business functions that I think an artificially intelligent system can actually attack a lot better than a pure, keyword-based system. And enterprise search as a market has been a tough one to crack for a very long time, in particular because they've all been keyword search. And so I think, and this is actually a thesis I have, if you're going to tackle the enterprise search problem, you do need to use something that understands nuance, that understands language, that understands NLP or NLU really. And so I would say try it, but don't expect to get 95% of the way there.
Dion, Ted, what else can I say? And thank you. And to all the attendees as well. I mean, I can't believe with such a niche topic, You were so numerous, like more than 100 was there, and now still 80 of you. Hopefully you learn something that can be applicable to your business. And if you'd like a V2 of something that is as technical, please feel free to use the chat box. That conversation was brought to you by New Fund, which is a French VC, one of the largest. We have about 60 startups in our portfolio. There are a few of them that are absolutely fantastic. And if you're an entrepreneur and if you're looking to raise some cash, feel free to reach out to our director of investment. We'd love to have a look and would love to be part of your success. Ted, Dion, thank you guys. It was amazing catching up with you. And if I have some specific questions coming my way, would you mind if I forward those questions to you?
Of course, sure thing.
Bye, everyone. It was really fantastic.